So today I want to do something a little different. Most of the time in this class, I try to explain what is happening right now. I try to give you a framework. I try to give you the tools to understand the world. And we have been doing that a lot recently with this war. But today, I want to make a prediction. Now, before I do that, I want to go back because I think it is important, very important to understand how we got here. Because if you understand how I made the first three predictions, you will understand why the new prediction I am making today is not just a guess. It is not just an opinion. It is the logical conclusion of everything we have studied together in this class. Okay, so let us go back to May 2024. It is May 2024. Joe Biden is still the president of the United States. Donald Trump is facing 91 criminal charges. Most people in the media are saying Trump cannot win. Most people are saying there will be no war with Iran. The world looks relatively stable. And in this classroom, I made three predictions. Prediction number 1, Donald Trump will win the presidential election in November 2024. Prediction number 2, the United States will go to war with Iran. Prediction number 3, the United States will lose this war, and this loss will forever change the global order. Now, 2 of these predictions have already come true. Trump won. America went to war with Iran, and the whole world is now watching to see if the third prediction comes true as well. But here's what I want you to understand today. I did not make those predictions because I have special access to classified information. I made them because I applied a method, a structured way of reading situations that most commentators ignore. And I want to walk you through that method today, step by step, so you can test my new prediction yourself. The method has 3 components. First, structure. What are the deep forces shaping the situation? Geography, economics, demographics, the things that change slowly and constrain what is possible. Second, incentives. What does each player in this situation actually want? Not what they say they want publicly, but what their behavior tells us they are optimizing for. Third, historical pattern. Not because history repeats exactly, but because certain structural situations tend to produce certain outcomes across centuries, across civilizations, again and again. When you combine these 3 lenses, you stop guessing and start reasoning. That is what we are doing today. So let us start with what actually happened, because I want to make sure we are all working from the same verified set of facts. On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated surprise airstrikes across Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several other senior officials in the opening strikes. The strikes targeted nuclear facilities, ballistic missile infrastructure, naval assets, and drone production sites. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed the death of its naval commander in subsequent Israeli strikes. By day 35 of the conflict, according to Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, more than 2,000 people had been killed and more than 26,000 wounded inside Iran. The Iranian government has disputed the framing of many individual strikes, including the bombing of a bridge near Tehran, which the U.S. government said was used for military logistics and which Iran said was civilian infrastructure. Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes every day. Almost all commercial shipping has halted. Oil prices have risen above $100 per barrel. Iran has also launched what its military describes as waves of drone and missile strikes against U.S. military bases in the Gulf states, against Israel, and against infrastructure across the region. By day 32 of the conflict, Iran had launched 87 such waves. 2 American fighter jets, an F-15E Strike Eagle, and an A-10 Thunderbolt were shot down in the conflict as of the first week of April. Peace efforts are ongoing through Pakistani and other intermediaries. Trump has proposed a deal in which Iran ends all nuclear enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran has denied that formal talks are underway, and its government has said the war will continue until its enemies face what it describes as humiliation and surrender. Now, I want to walk you through what each player actually wants, not the official statements, the real underlying interests, because those are what determine outcomes. What does the United States say it wants? It says it wants to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. It says it wants to halt Iran's ballistic missile program and degrade its regional proxy network. These are the stated objectives. What structural analysts argue the US actually wants is harder to separate from the official narrative, and reasonable people disagree. One school of analysis, and this is contested, argues that the deeper goal is to maintain Western control over the oil infrastructure of the Gulf, which underpins the role of the dollar in global energy trade. Another school argues the primary driver is preventing a nuclear-armed Iran from fundamentally altering the regional balance of power that has existed since 1979. A third view, reflected in some Atlantic Council expert analysis, is that Trump is seeking achievable military objectives, degrading Iran's capabilities, while preserving an exit that does not require ground troops. I want to be transparent that these interpretations are contested. What is not contested is this: the stated military objectives are being pursued through air and sea power, and according to Atlantic Council analysts, U.S. conventional ground forces are not being mobilized. What does Iran want? Iran's primary goal, according to analysts, is survival. Specifically, the survival of the Islamic Republic as a governing system. Iran also wants the permanent lifting of sanctions and recognition as a legitimate regional power. It wants to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz as a long-term strategic asset, not just a wartime pressure tool. And critically, Iran appears to believe, based on its public statements and its behavior, that time is on its side. Every week that passes without a ground invasion is a week in which American domestic pressure builds, oil prices remain elevated, and the economic cost of the war becomes more visible to ordinary Americans and Europeans. What does the Israeli government want? This is where I need to be precise about something important. When analysts discuss Israel's strategic objectives, they are discussing the decisions of the Netanyahu government and the Israeli security establishment, not the Jewish people and not Israeli society as a whole, which contains significant internal debate about this war. The Israeli government's stated objectives include the permanent elimination of Iran's nuclear weapons capability and the destruction of the command structure of Iran's regional proxy network. What structural analysts argue goes deeper. The Israeli government is seeking to lock in a new regional order in which Iran is permanently weakened and in which Israel becomes the indispensable security partner for Western interests in the Middle East. Whether that bet succeeds or fails depends entirely on how this war ends. Now let me give you the structural facts that will determine the outcome. These are not opinions. These are the constraints that all the players are operating inside. Structural fact number 1. Air power alone has never achieved regime change. This is not controversial among military historians. America bombed North Vietnam for years. Vietnam did not surrender. The Allied air campaign against Germany in World War II was devastating, and Germany still did not surrender until Soviet and American ground troops were physically inside its territory. Iran, with a population of approximately 90 million people and difficult mountainous terrain, would require hundreds of thousands of ground troops to occupy, according to Atlantic Council defense analysts. The U.S. is not mobilizing conventional ground forces. Trump has specifically cited the Iraq experience, the deployment of ground troops, the disbanding of the Iraqi army, as the model he wants to avoid. This means the military strategy is, by design, limited to what air and sea power can achieve. Structural fact number 2. The cost exchange is unsustainable over time. Iran fires a drone that costs in the range of tens of thousands of dollars. The United States fires an interceptor missile that costs several $million to shoot it down. That asymmetry, repeated across 87 waves of attacks, depletes American interceptor stockpiles at a rate that the defense industrial base cannot quickly replace. The F-35 took 26 years to develop. Interceptor missiles take years to manufacture at scale. Iran's drone production, on the other hand, is dispersed across the country in facilities that can be rebuilt. This gap only widens over time. Structural fact number 3. The economic pressure is real and building. Oil above $100 per barrel hits households directly. It hits supply chains. It hits fertilizer prices, which hit food prices, which hit every family in every country that imports food, including across Europe. Iran's parliament has even proposed a system of tolls on vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz once it reopens. The United Kingdom is currently holding talks with approximately 40 countries on how to reopen the strait, according to reporting from Al Jazeera. The United States is not participating in those talks. That detail alone tells you something important about where the diplomatic center of gravity is right now. Structural fact number 4. American domestic political will is not unlimited. Approximately 40% of Americans support the war, according to available polling. That number historically falls as costs rise and casualties accumulate. More than 200 U.S. soldiers have already filed complaints about superior officers using religious rhetoric to justify the conflict. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth abruptly fired the Army's top general in the middle of an active war, which has raised significant questions about wartime military leadership inside the U.S. government. The political consensus behind the war is narrower and more fragile than the official rhetoric suggests. Now I have laid out the method, the players, and the structural constraints. Let me give you the prediction. I believe this war ends in one of two ways, and which way it ends depends on a single critical question. Does the United States send ground troops into Iran or not? Let me walk you through both scenarios carefully, because each leads to a fundamentally different outcome. Scenario 1. America keeps this an air war. In this scenario, the United States continues striking Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear sites, and command networks from the air. Iran continues its drone and missile campaign across the region. The war drags on for months. American interceptor stockpiles continue to deplete faster than they can be replaced. Oil prices stay elevated. The global economic pressure builds. At some point, and I believe this is the most likely outcome, Trump finds a face-saving exit. He goes on television and says something like, "We have achieved our core military objectives. We have degraded Iran's nuclear program and its regional military capabilities. We are bringing our forces home." And that will be partially true. Iran's nuclear program has been set back. Its naval fleet has been heavily damaged. Its proxy network is weaker than it was. But here is what will also be true. Iran is still standing. The Islamic Republic is still governing. The Strait of Hormuz remains Iran's strategic leverage. And in the aftermath of an American withdrawal, Iran emerges as a confirmed regional power, one that absorbed the most powerful air campaign since World War II and survived. In this scenario, the regional order reorganizes. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, will hedge. Some will move closer to Iran, some will consolidate around Israel, and the region will settle into a more multipolar structure than existed before February 28th. This is what I mean when I say America loses the war. Not a military collapse, not a battlefield surrender, but a strategic outcome in which the stated goal, regime change, permanent elimination of the nuclear program, is not achieved. America withdraws, Iran survives, and the global credibility of American military deterrence is measurably weaker than it was. Scenario 2, America sends ground troops into Iran. In this scenario, the political pressure from the Gulf states becomes overwhelming. Iran is targeting their infrastructure, their oil terminals, their airports. They are screaming at Washington to finish this. Trump, without a clear exit path from the air campaign, decides to escalate. This is where the structural facts I laid out become decisive. Iran has been preparing for a ground invasion for approximately 25 years. Underground military installations in mountain ranges. Weapon systems specifically designed for close-range infantry combat, a population of 90 million people, many of whom, whatever they think of the Islamic Republic as a political system, will fight a foreign occupying force. We know from Atlantic Council analysts that occupying Iran would require hundreds of thousands of ground troops. The entire active U.S. military numbers approximately 1.3 million personnel. A full ground invasion would require a draft. And a draft would trigger social and political upheaval inside the United States that no administration could survive. Iran knows this. Iran's entire strategic doctrine is built around making the cost of a ground invasion so catastrophically high that no American president will authorize one. There is also a regional dimension that almost nobody in Western media is discussing clearly. If American ground forces are physically inside Iran, what constraints remain on Iraq-based militias moving against American bases in the Gulf? What stops Yemen from extending its campaign southward into Saudi territory? American supply lines into any ground operation inside Iran run through the same Gulf bases that are already being targeted by Iranian drone strikes. A ground invasion does not simplify the war. It multiplies the fronts on which America is exposed. I do not believe a full-scale ground invasion of Iran will happen, not because Trump lacks the impulse to order one, but because the institutional pressure against it, from military commanders who understand the actual logistics, from economic advisors who understand what a draft does to an economy, is too strong. There may be special operations missions, there may be limited incursions, but a full ground invasion is the one outcome that would most rapidly and irreversibly collapse American strategic credibility. The people around Trump who understand this will fight that decision. So those are the two scenarios: an air war that ends in a managed American withdrawal, or a ground war that ends in catastrophe. Now, let me give you my 3 specific predictions for how this ends. Prediction 1, there will be no full-scale ground invasion of Iran. The structural barriers are too high, the institutional resistance inside the American military establishment is too strong, and Trump has specifically cited the Iraq ground war as the model he wants to avoid. I may be wrong, but based on the structural analysis, I think the probability of a full ground invasion is low. Prediction 2, this war ends with some form of negotiated settlement or American de-escalation within 12 to 24 months. Here is the pathway I see as most likely. Pakistan, China, Russia, and the Gulf states, none of whom want this disruption to continue indefinitely, will coordinate pressure on both sides. We already know Pakistan is pushing for talks and has met with Chinese diplomats in Beijing specifically on this issue. We know that Iran's former foreign minister, Javad Zarif, has proposed a framework. Iran drops nuclear weapons development, the US lifts sanctions. We know Trump has said he is open to a deal. The question is whether both sides can construct an agreement that each can sell domestically as a win. That is harder than it sounds. Iran deeply distrusts the United States. Every time Iran has signed an agreement with America, from the original diplomatic frameworks to the JCPOA in 2015, the subsequent administration has torn it up. Iran saw what happened when Trump withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018. It is not going to sign a paper agreement unless the conditions on the ground have fundamentally changed, which means the facts have to shift first before a durable agreement is possible. But I do believe the economic pressure on the global system, oil above $100, the Hormuz closure, supply chain disruption across Europe and Asia, will eventually force a negotiated outcome. The timeline, I believe, is 12 to 24 months. Prediction 3. The Middle East that emerges from this war will be more multipolar, not less. And this is the prediction with the longest lasting consequences. When the dust settles, 2 regional powers will have consolidated their positions. Iran, damaged, weaker in some military dimensions, but politically legitimized by having survived, will control or heavily influence the eastern arc of the region. Israel's government, which has achieved significant military objectives, will be positioned as the dominant security force in the Western Arc. The Gulf states will navigate between them, aligning pragmatically rather than ideologically. And here is the element that the Western commentariat consistently underestimates. Iran and the government of Israel, despite being declared ideological enemies, have a structural interest in the continued weakness of the Gulf monarchies. They will not become friends, but they may find themselves in the long run as 2 strong powers who understand each other's limits and choose to compete for influence over weaker states rather than destroy each other. That is not peace. It is a managed rivalry, and it is very different from the American-dominated order that existed before February 28th. Let me address the 3 questions I get asked most. First, will nuclear weapons be used? No, I want to be clear about this. The nuclear taboo is the most powerful norm in modern international relations. Since Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, no country has used nuclear weapons in warfare across nearly 80 years and dozens of major conflicts. Breaking that taboo would immediately trigger every non-nuclear state to pursue its own weapons program. It would mean the end of the entire international non-proliferation system. No rational actor in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran benefits from that outcome. Second, is this America's Sicilian expedition? This is a comparison historians are making, and I want to take it seriously rather than dismiss it. In 415 BC, Athens was the most powerful city-state in the ancient Greek world. It launched an enormous military expedition to conquer Sicily, overextended itself, and never recovered. Whether the Sicilian expedition analogy holds depends on whether America finds a disciplined exit before the costs compound to the point of irreversibility. Athens could not. The question for America is whether it can. This is not prophecy. This is structural reasoning from verified facts and historical patterns. Follow the structure, follow the incentives, follow the historical pattern.